Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks all of you for being here. I was serving as Attorney General the day of the bombings, Commissioner in particular, and I know that Colonel Fuentes had said to me, having had a relationship with you, that he thought he knew that the response was going to be outstanding, and that's what all of us saw. Heroism, professionalism, and the other thing I was struck by was the cohesion that all of the different law enforcement agencies brought to a really chaotic situation. No elbowing, no sort of, I'm here, this is my turf, this is your turf. The sense was, and the perception was, certainly from my standpoint, was an incredibly integrated group that was focused on one thing. That was keeping people safe, getting them treatment, and then making sure that we got the people that did this as quickly as possible. So congratulations to all of you for the roles that you played, in particular the folks in Boston and the FBI and everybody else that was involved. I think Senator Ayotte makes an excellent point. And one of the things that I certainly had always had a lot of consternation about was the compartmentalization of information. And I think we've taken great steps. I know we've worked really hard on it in New Jersey. And what I want to ask you, Commissioner, is what you said there are 4 Boston PD members of the JTTF. How many state police members of the JTTF?
There are 7 full-time.
7 full-time. And how did you make those determinations for the numbers that you'd have sitting full-time on the JTTF?
The decisions have been made over the years based upon our staffing and where we could get bodies to put into that unit. And as the issue ebbs and flows, we've maintained the same number of people. But after conversations I've had with Ray Kelly in New York City and some of my other colleagues, I think that it's time to increase the number of officers that are there so that we can have a wider presence at the JTTF. That might help the communications issue.
And I want to talk to you about a little bit about the fusion centers. I know when immediately following, because there was, what I noticed during this time was that information was flowing to different states. So there were some contacts in New Jersey that had to be run down. There were contacts in other states, certainly New York, that had to be run down. And I got debriefed afterwards and went to the fusion center, our fusion center, and I was really impressed with the way we were able to coordinate that information. What is your impression of the effectiveness of the fusion centers being used specifically for this incident, and then the steps that you may be taking to improve the way you're able to utilize those resources going forward?
Well, I think that it's really important to engage the fusion centers in a more active way with the JTTFs. There are different models of that across the nation, but there could be an improvement in the coordination of information among the agencies, especially DHS and some of the analytical ability that they bring to the process, and making sure that information is better shared. That's sort of the area that the Chiefs Association, the major city chiefs, would like to enter into in looking at the MOU, so that MOU can be crafted so that there's a real, it's got teeth in it to push the information both ways.
Right, and when other cities or other communities call you and other nations call you about your response, what advice do you give then to places where fusion centers have been stood up? And there's certainly always a debate as to, there's intelligence that comes for street crime that's used through the fusion centers, which is very effective to combat gun violence and combat gang violence. They were set up, though, primarily in large measure post 9/11 to make sure that we were coordinating the information on potential terrorism activity. So what advice do you have to other cities in terms of creating the correct balance in allocating the resources for the fusion centers to deal with those two competing interests?
I really think it's important to brief cases out jointly so that there's an intelligence flow back and forth, and the information that comes in from the street can be extremely helpful to ongoing JTTF investigations. So my offices can access all of our systems, but there's limited access to federal systems, and that's where the rub is. Names can fall through the cracks here the way it's set up.
And what are what are the ways that you think this committee can help with getting rid of some of those things falling through the cracks? And then specifically, I'm talking about the fusion centers, which I know have a lot of federal money behind them. What can we talk about, or what are the steps that we should be thinking about to help in that regard?
I just believe that generally, a rule that says if there's threat information on terrorism in a particular jurisdiction, the jurisdiction has to be brought into the conversation about it. Even if the case is closed out, we should know what the allegation was. And at this point in time, that is not happening.
Over your years, I think a lot of this has to do with developing relationships. And I think somebody remarked before that you shouldn't be handing out business cards at the scene of one of these incidents. I think that's an excellent point. And so over your years in developing these relationships, I think it's a critical issue. And I think you could see the effectiveness that it had with all of you working together that day. And I know that this tension exists in other jurisdictions. You know, we deal with it in other places, and I don't think it's not designed to in any way to undermine our ability to do these investigations. I think there are people that think they're better situated than others, better trained, or whatever you want to call it. So what I hope this committee will think about, and I hope that all of you will continue to give us information about, is the ways that we can continue to help those relationships become solidified in ways that there are trust. And I'm not just talking about the ones where regionally in Boston and New Hampshire, where people have worked together over time, but I think Senator Coburn talked before about these conferences, and some conferences are better than other conferences. Well, the conferences that we get all of you in a room together to talk about terrorism activities and sharing information seems to me to be a really good way to spend our money and have you spend your time. Would you agree with that?
I agree completely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.